I'm a tattoo artist. I've spent years helping people figure out what they want on their bodies forever. I've covered up tattoos, I've transformed tattoos, I've sat across people who felt self-conscious for years about what they wore on their body and helped them figure out what came next. And for years, I was embarrassed to show my own arms. Because while I was learning to help other people's tattoos tell the right story, mine were already telling the wrong one. This is what that taught me, and why I built something so it doesn't have to happen to you too. Before I walk you through this, I want to be clear about something. I do not have the most extreme story by any means. I don't have offensive tattoos that I'm trying to explain away in job interviews. My tattoos weren't trashy, they weren't objectively bad, but they didn't accurately represent who I was becoming. And there's a particular kind of self-doubt that starts to build when you look in the mirror and you see someone that doesn't feel like you. You stop turning towards cameras. You start narrating the tattoo away. You think really carefully about the outfits you're wearing in certain situations. It wasn't shame, but it wasn't pride. Here's what I know now. 1 in 4 people regret their tattoos, and I understand better why that happens. And it's largely preventable. What I didn't have when I first started collecting tattoos, and what I later realized that I desperately needed, was a layer of intentional authorship over permanent decisions. I'm going to walk you through 3 of my tattoo mistakes, what each one of them taught me, and at the end, we're going to walk through the framework so you don't have to learn the same way that I did. I got my first tattoo on my 18th birthday. It's the quote, "This too shall pass," in the most generic Pinterest cursive font you could imagine, and I'm not above telling you that. It was objectively 2012. But here's the thing, it's the only tattoo from my first years of collecting that I still fully agree with. And I've spent a long time trying to understand why, because the circumstances of getting it were almost comically considered. I started planning my future tattoos at like 15 or 16. I literally had a countdown app to my 18th birthday. I was that excited. By the time my 18th birthday came around, some of the tattoos that I felt most sure about felt laughably foreign to me. What happened in those 2 years was that I kept asking myself the same question over and over. Will my future self still love this? I didn't know I was doing anything useful. I just couldn't stop asking it because I had that long to think about it. And I ended up landing on "This too shall pass" because it felt, as I would tell my friends and my mom at the time, eternally applicable. Younger me had the foresight to know that future me would still need that reminder. And she was right. What I did accidentally, and what I now understand as intentional authorship, was choosing a symbol that was durable and elastic. It related to what I was experiencing at 18. It still relates to what I'm experiencing now, and undoubtedly it will relate to whatever I experience in the future. That's what a truly durable tattoo does for you. It finds you as you are across time. But somewhere after that, I stopped asking that question. And this is where things start going sideways. A few months after my first tattoo, I went to a regional tattoo convention. I had no plans of getting tattooed. I was just there to walk around and have fun. And then I walked past an artist booth who was from the same Hawaiian island, the same town that I had lived in from 11 to 13, one of the most formative periods of my life. I did what I now recognize as the classic impulse calculation. What can I afford? What would I even get? And how long do I have to decide before we circle back again? 20 minutes, maybe 30 if I'm being generous. So I asked the artist if he could tattoo the Hawaiian Islands small on my upper back, and I was sitting in the chair. This piece felt so true to me in the moment. I'd lived there. Some of my best experiences were had there. This idea was me. It was a genuine experiential tattoo, as I like to call them. And experiential tattoos are real and they're valid. They matter. But what I didn't do and what I couldn't do in 20 minutes was understand the weight of what I was saying with that tattoo. Because when I returned to Hawaii years later, when I better understood the cultural complexity of an outsider claiming ownership to lands that have been historically oppressed, I developed a new relationship to that tattoo. And it felt like it was marking something that I didn't have the right to speak on. This was a tattoo that marked a true time for me, but it was also carrying a much larger conversation that I hadn't fully joined yet. No experience, no collection style, no tattoo story is ever wrong. That's not what I'm saying, and I will never make that claim. But I do want to name what happened here. I made a permanent decision in a very small temporary window. My nervous system was excited and my timeline was compressed. And my future self, who would eventually return to Hawaii, who would do a lot more reading and understand things from a whole new perspective, didn't have a seat at that table. The Hawaiian Islands tattoo was an impulse without the full information. The next one was a lot simpler and in some ways even more instructive. You know the show Lost? Well, I watched every episode, every season for its full 6-year run. It was a delight, a frustration, and an obsession. If you know, you know. I had a day off and it was a random Tuesday morning. And the thought just appeared. I want a tattoo today. And for whatever reason, the next thought that occurred to me was the reoccurring numbers from Lost on my forearm. What else could it be? I called around, I found the very first walk-in, and I literally walked right in. But I had not modeled for one moment what it would look like for me to live with the numbers from Lost visibly on my forearm for the rest of my life. It just didn't even occur to me to ask. And then I woke up the next morning with the numbers from Lost on my arm and immediately started having to answer questions about what they meant. I still loved Lost, but the tattoo was asking me to commit to a level of Lost that I hadn't really fully considered when I was calling around for walk-ins. There's a difference between wanting a tattoo today and having considered that tattoo long enough to know if your future self might still be on board. Duration isn't always the same as readiness. These first 2 mistakes were about information, impulse, compacted timelines, and just not modeling the future. The third mistake was about the state I was in when I chose this tattoo. At 19, I was processing the end of a very difficult relationship. The pain was real. The itch to mark that moment, to exercise my freedom, and to reclaim my identity was also very real. So I got my first large piece, a snake, a peony dripping honey, and the Latin phrase, "Love is rich with both venom and honey." I was trying to close a chapter. I was trying to move forward. But what I accidentally did was freeze a painful moment of my life on my skin. There's a concept in psychology around embodied cognition, the idea that physical sensations anchor memory stronger than just mental recall alone. A tattoo doesn't just represent a moment. For some people, it returns you to it. And for years, every time I looked at this tattoo, I was returned to that version of me, the version who was heartbroken and bitter and desperately trying to reclaim my agency, but was doing it in the most painful moment. Not the resolved version, the one who was still in it. I started calling it privately to myself my bitter tattoo. It wore this costume of empowerment, but underneath it, it was a dysregulated nervous system, solidified in form on my body. Now, I want to be careful here because I'm not saying that you have to wait until you feel nothing until you make a permanent decision. What I am saying is that there's a difference between two states. One is reaction. When you're still inside of the experience, your nervous system is activated. The meaning is real, but it's raw. It's not yet stable. The other is resolution. You're on the other side of it. The meaning has been tested. You've lived with it long enough to know what it actually is, and you see it differently on the other side of healing. Tattoos from reaction aren't wrong, but they have a cautionary tale. They risk aging differently than tattoos from resolution. And knowing which state you're in when you're booking your appointment is the thing I wish someone had told me at the time. The funny part is, happily married years later, I still agree with what I was trying to say with that piece, that love is hard, but it's worth it. But because I got it in the middle of the pain, it crystallized a version of myself that I had to live with forever, and that looked a lot different once I had actually healed from that pain. I eventually covered that piece. My husband is a tattoo artist, and that helped. And standing there, looking at a tattoo that fully felt like me, not the urgent version, not the reactive version, but the examined version, I understood something that I hadn't been able to name fully before. The relief wasn't just about the visual. It was about looking at yourself and being able to fully recognize what you see. That's what tattoos can do at their best. That's what I want for every person I have the honor of tattooing and everyone who collects tattoos period. Tattoos are permanent marks on impermanent people. You are going to change many times over. That's not a bug, that's actually the whole point of living. But here's the question that I kept getting stuck on, and maybe you are too. How do you align with the future self that you haven't become yet? There's a concept in behavioral economics called bounded rationality. Put simply, everyone is making the best decisions they can at any given moment with the limited information they have at that time. The version of me who got those tattoos did not have a crystal ball. She made the decisions she made because that was the full scope of information she had at that moment in time. That's not a character flaw. That's just what it means to be human when you're not done becoming yourself yet. So the goal can't be to get it right, but the goal can be integrity of process. Deciding with enough care that your future self can still stand behind how you chose, even if the relationship to the tattoo shifts. And I've come to believe that there are 3 conditions that protect those decisions as much as possible when you're making them. Number 1, am I in a grounded decision state? Number 2, does this resonate with me or just appeal to me? And number 3, am I willing to live with this even if I change? When you decide with that kind of care, regardless of whether you fully know who you're becoming, your tattoos feel fully owned. Even if you change, you can love them in a new light. This represents the me that did their absolute best. That's what I'm trying to build with Body as Story, to make the process of choosing something permanent feel more reliable. It's not certainty, and it's not a guarantee, but it's a process that you can stand behind. What I advocate for isn't caution, it's not fear, and it's not having a 5-year plan before you book your next tattoo. It's authorship. Slowing down enough to choose something that your future self can still stand behind. Because your current self deserves a tattoo that you want, but your future self deserves a tattoo that they still love in 10 years from now. I never built this framework because I had it all figured out. Exactly the opposite. I built it because I didn't, and I needed one. If any of this resonated, if you've ever gotten a tattoo that felt like someone else's choice, I have a free tool called the Regret Reframe that I built exactly for that. The link is in the description. And if you're thinking about your next tattoo and want to go into it more intentionally, I have the Tattoo Concept Builder. It helps you figure out the why behind your tattoo before you look for the what. I'll see you in the next one.